I never thought I'd be the kind of person who cheats. But one night, on a bed that wasn't mine, I realized I already had. She was my boss. He was her husband. And now, I can't erase what we did. I admired her. She was the kind of woman people noticed the second she walked into a room, poised, powerful, the kind of leader everyone respected. My boss. I had only been working for her company for 6 months, but in that short time, I had already learned that no one questioned her authority. She was flawless, in her work, in her attitude, in the way she carried herself. And in her perfect marriage. Or at least, that's what I thought. Until the night he messaged me. It started innocently enough. A simple notification flashing across my phone screen late at night. Daniel, hey. I hesitated. Daniel was her husband. I had met him a few times at office events, always standing by her side, the charming counterpart to her controlled, sophisticated presence. He was attractive, undeniably so, with a sharp jawline, an easy smile, and a confidence that felt effortless. But we had never spoken beyond polite greetings. So why was he messaging me now? I stared at the text, debating whether to respond. Me, hi. The dots appeared almost instantly. Daniel, didn't mean to disturb you this late. Just thought I'd say hello. I frowned, my fingers hovering over the screen. Was this normal? Was I overthinking it? Me, no worries. Everything okay? A pause. Then. Daniel, yeah. Just couldn't sleep. I bit my lip. Something about the simplicity of his words felt calculated. Like he was waiting for me to say something first. I didn't. Instead, I locked my phone, tossed it onto my nightstand, and went to sleep. At least, I tried. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought lingered. Why did it feel like that message was the beginning of something? I told myself it was nothing. A message. A conversation. A moment of curiosity that would fade just as quickly as it appeared. But Daniel didn't stop texting me. At first, it was casual, simple check-ins, random jokes, harmless little exchanges that I could convince myself meant nothing. Until they weren't. Until his words became more personal. Until the pauses between my replies became shorter. Until I started waiting for his messages, my heart racing the second his name lit up my screen. I knew it was wrong. I knew exactly who he was. And yet, every night, as I lay in bed, staring at my phone, I read his words like they were meant just for me. Daniel, you ever feel like you're living the wrong life? I hesitated before typing. Me, what do you mean? His reply came fast. Daniel, like, you woke up one day, and everything was already decided for you. And now, you just go through the motions, because that's what's expected. I swallowed hard. Because I knew that feeling too well. Me, yeah. I get that. A pause. Then. Daniel, I knew you would. That message shouldn't have made my stomach flip. But it did. The first time we met alone, I told myself it wasn't intentional. I had been working late at the office, finishing up a project, when my phone buzzed. Daniel, you're still at work? Me, yeah. Long day. Daniel, I'm nearby. Want to grab a drink? I should have said no. I should have shut it down right then and there. But I didn't. And that's how I ended up sitting across from him in a dimly lit bar, a half-empty glass between us, the space charged with something neither of us wanted to name. I told myself it was just a drink. Just a conversation. But then his hand brushed against mine. And I didn't pull away. His fingers lingered for just a second too long, his touch light but deliberate, his eyes locked on mine like he was waiting for me to make the next move. I knew what was happening. And I let it happen anyway. That night, as I lay in bed, replaying every second of that moment, my phone buzzed again. Daniel, can't stop thinking about you. I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering against my ribs. this was the moment. The last chance to stop. To take a step back before the line blurred completely. But instead, me too. And just like that, I had cheated. Even if we hadn't crossed that final line yet, I knew. It had already begun. I thought about him too much. At work. At home. Late at night, when my phone sat beside me, just waiting for his name to light up the screen. It wasn't just flirting anymore. It was an obsession. Every text, every glance across the office, every accidental touch, it all built up until I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for something inevitable. And then, one night, I let it happen. It started with a call. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself, when his name appeared on the screen. Daniel. I hesitated before answering. "Hey," I whispered. He exhaled into the receiver. "You sound tired." "I can't sleep." "Me neither." A pause. Then, "I wish I was there." My breath hitched. The words hung between us, heavy and unspoken. And then he said the one thing that made it impossible to pretend anymore. "I don't want to stop this." My chest tightened. "Neither do I." That was all it took. 15 minutes later, I was in his car. We didn't say much. We didn't have to. The silence between us was thick with everything we had held back for weeks. By the time we reached the hotel, my hands were already shaking. From nerves. From anticipation. From the feeling that I was stepping into something I could never undo. I followed him inside. The door shut behind us. And then, finally, he kissed me. Slow at first, like he was testing if I'd pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. The weight of every late-night message, every stolen glance, every touch that lingered too long crashed over me at once. I had cheated. Fully. Completely. And the worst part? I didn't regret it. Not yet. I woke up before him. The room was dim, only a sliver of light creeping through the heavy curtains. My body ached in ways that made it impossible to deny what had happened. The sheets were tangled around me, his warmth still lingering on my skin. And then I felt it, the weight of what I had done. I turned my head, barely breathing as I watched him sleep. Daniel. My boss's husband. I had cheated. Fully. Completely. There was no way to rewrite it, no way to pretend it hadn't happened. And yet, I didn't move. I didn't regret it. Not yet. Instead, I let my fingers graze over the sheets, my mind still lost in the way his hands had felt on my skin, the way his lips had traced every inch of me like he had been waiting for this as long as I had. It had been reckless. It had been inevitable. And now, we were here. His phone buzzed. I flinched, the sound cutting through the silence. He stirred beside me, his brows furrowing, before he reached for the device on the nightstand. I saw the name flash across the screen before he flipped it over. Her. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding as reality came crashing back. His wife. My boss. I had slept with a married man. A man who wasn't just anyone, he belonged to her. I should have felt sick. I should have gotten up, left, erased every trace of this night before it was too late. Instead, I just stared at him. He ran a hand over his face, before turning to me, his gaze unreadable. And then he did something that caught me off guard. He smirked. "Morning," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. I didn't answer. Because for the first time since this started, a new thought crept into my mind. What happens now? I told myself it was a one-time thing. That night was an exception. A mistake. Something I could bury and forget. But the problem with these things is, they're never just one time. You tell yourself, it was just one night. Then you reach for your phone. And before you even realize what's happening, one night becomes a habit. And suddenly, you're the one finding excuses to let it happen again. We stopped pretending. There were no more long explanations, no more excuses. Now, there was an understanding, we had crossed the line, and neither of us was going to turn back. His hands would find me when no one was looking. His messages would appear when I least expected them. His voice would be the last thing I heard before falling asleep. It became our secret world. And I didn't even realize that it was slowly swallowing everything else. And then I noticed, he wasn't hiding anymore. It was in the little things. The way he looked at me in the office, longer, bolder. The way he touched me in places where someone could have seen. The way he smirked, like he wasn't afraid of getting caught. That should have been enough to make me stop. But instead, it thrilled me. I convinced myself it meant he loved me. That I was special. That if he was willing to take this risk, then it wasn't just cheating anymore. It was us. But if I had known what was coming next, I would have never been so sure. I should have left. I should have gathered my clothes, slipped out the door, and erased this night before it became something more. But I didn't. I lay there, still tangled in the sheets, my body warm from the night before, watching him as he checked his phone. Her messages lit up his screen, but he didn't rush to answer. He just sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw, before setting the phone back down. Like nothing had changed. Like this was normal for him. And for the first time, that realization made my stomach twist. "You're quiet." His voice broke the silence, deep and rough from sleep. I hesitated. What am I supposed to say? Daniel smirked, stretching before leaning on his elbow, to look at me. Most people start with "good morning." I swallowed. Most people don't wake up in a hotel bed with their boss's husband. His smirk didn't fade. If anything, it deepened. "No regrets, then?" I opened my mouth, ready to say yes, ready to lie, but the truth sat heavy on my tongue. I didn't regret it. Not the way I should have. Instead of answering, I sat up, pulling the sheet around me as I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The cool air hit my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. I felt him move behind me, his fingers grazing my arm, a silent invitation. I could have turned back. I could have let this happen again. But something about the way he looked at me, the way he wasn't worried, wasn't guilty, wasn't afraid, made me pause. "Have you done this before?" His silence was all the answer I needed. I stood up, gathering my clothes, suddenly desperate to get out of there before this became something I couldn't escape. "You don't have to run," Daniel said, watching me. I scoffed, pulling my dress over my head. "I think I do." "Why?" He leaned back against the pillows, completely unbothered. "She'll never find out." Something about how easily he said it made my chest tighten. "She trusts you," I said quietly. Daniel just shrugged. "People trust what they want to believe." I felt sick. Because he wasn't wrong. And the worst part? I wasn't sure this was the last time I'd let it happen. I told myself it was over. That morning, as I walked out of the hotel room, heart pounding, guilt pressing against my ribs, I swore it wouldn't happen again. It was a mistake. A moment of weakness. Something I could bury, pretend never existed. But that was a lie. Because that night, when my phone buzzed and I saw his name flash across the screen, I didn't hesitate. I opened the message. "Daniel, you left too fast this morning." I stared at the words for too long, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I had to. A pause. Then, "Daniel, did you?" I exhaled slowly, my pulse quickening. This was dangerous. I knew it. He knew it. But instead of shutting it down, instead of reminding him, and myself, that this was a one-time thing, I typed something else. I don't know." The dots appeared immediately. "Daniel, then let's find out." My stomach flipped. I swallowed hard, my body already betraying me. Me, where? His reply was instant. Daniel, my place. I should have said no. I should have blocked his number, deleted the messages, and moved on before this turned into something bigger than a mistake. But as I stood in front of his door an hour later, hands shaking, heat pooling in my chest, I knew. I wasn't stopping. The door opened, and he was there, looking at me like he already knew the decision I had made before I did. He didn't say anything. He just pulled me inside, shut the door, and erased every last trace of my hesitation. I had cheated once. Now, I was choosing to do it again. And that was worse. Because this wasn't a mistake anymore. This was an affair. I used to believe that guilt had a voice. That it whispered in the back of your mind, clawing at your conscience, reminding you of every wrong decision. But as I lay there in Daniel's bed, his arm draped over me, his breath warm against my shoulder, I felt nothing. No shame. No regret. No warning in my mind screaming at me to stop. Just the weight of his body next to mine. Just the rush of knowing that I had gotten away with it. Again. It didn't take long for patterns to form. For stolen moments in the office, accidental touches that lingered too long. For hushed conversations in dark parking lots, whispered words that meant too much. For late-night meetings in his apartment, the lines between right and wrong disappearing with every passing second. I had convinced myself we were careful. That no one knew. That this was still a secret. Until the night someone found out. It started with a look. I was walking into the office when I saw her, my boss. The woman I had admired, respected. The woman I was betraying. She stood near her office, talking to someone, but her eyes flickered to me for just a moment. And in that moment, something inside me froze. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. She just watched. Like she knew. Like she was waiting for me to confirm it. I swallowed hard, my hands tightening into fists. No. She couldn't know. We had been too careful. Hadn't we? That night, as I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone, my fingers trembled over the screen. Me, she looked at me weird today. Daniel's reply was instant. Daniel, you're overthinking it. Was I? Because I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. That the game we were playing was about to collapse. That she was watching. Waiting. And if she really knew, we were already caught. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. That my boss's stare that morning had been nothing. A coincidence. A trick of my own guilty conscience. But then it happened again. And this time, I knew. It was late, the office nearly empty, just the hum of computers and the faint clicking of a keyboard somewhere in the distance. I was packing up my things when I heard her voice. Stay for a minute. I froze. Slowly, I turned to see her standing near the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp. My stomach dropped. I forced a nod, keeping my expression neutral as I set my bag back down. Of course. She walked to her desk, gesturing for me to sit. I did, hands folded in my lap, heart hammering against my ribs. The silence stretched. Then, are you happy here? I blinked, caught off guard. What? She tilted her head. At work. Do you feel comfortable here? Satisfied? I swallowed hard. Yes. I mean, of course. She studied me, her gaze unreadable. Good. Another pause. Then. I believe in loyalty, you know. My fingers twitched. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Loyalty is everything in this business. You stick with the people who trust you. Who invest in you. Who put you in a position to succeed. My throat went dry. This wasn't about work. She was telling me something else. Warning me. I agree, I managed to say. Her smile lingered. I'm glad to hear that. Then, as if the conversation meant nothing, she waved her hand. "That's all. You can go." I nodded quickly, grabbing my bag, heading for the door as fast as I could without running. But before I stepped out, she spoke again. "Oh, and one more thing." I stopped. Turned. She met my eyes. Some mistakes only need to happen once to ruin everything. I didn't breathe. Didn't move. And in that moment, I knew. She knew. I thought the worst thing that could happen was that she suspected us. I was wrong. Because when my boss decided to act, it wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It was cold. Calculated. Precise. And by the time I realized what she was doing, it was already too late. The first sign that things had changed was when I arrived at the office and found out that my project had been reassigned. I had been working on it for months. I had given it everything. And just like that, it was no longer mine. "Just a management decision," she told me when I asked. But I saw the smirk playing on her lips. This was her way of saying, "I'm in control. And this is just the beginning." Then came the rumors. I didn't know who started them. But suddenly, I could feel the tension in the office, the way people hesitated before talking to me, the way glances lingered for just a second too long. And suddenly, I was invisible. Like I had already been written off. One day, Daniel pulled me aside, his voice lower than usual. "She's playing with you," he said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" He sighed. "She's done this before. She doesn't scream. She doesn't make a scene. She just breaks you down until you walk away." My hands clenched. "You mean this has happened before?" He didn't answer. And that was the moment I felt real fear for the first time. I wasn't the first. Which meant, she already knew exactly how to make me the next victim. I barely slept that night. Her words ran through my head on repeat, each syllable sinking deeper, wrapping around my throat like a noose. Some mistakes only need to happen once to ruin everything. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. And now, I was waiting for the moment she decided to make good on it. The next morning, I walked into the office with my heart pounding in my ears. I told myself to act normal. To breathe. To pretend. But the second I stepped inside, I knew something had shifted. The air was different. Tighter. Heavier. And then I saw him. Daniel. He stood near the elevators, his phone in hand, his jaw tight. The moment his eyes locked onto mine, I felt it. We were in trouble. I barely had time to process it before my phone buzzed. A message. From her. "Boss, my office. Now." My stomach dropped. I looked up, and through the glass walls of her office, she was already watching me. Waiting. I forced my legs to move, each step feeling like I was walking toward my own execution. The door closed behind me with a quiet click. She didn't tell me to sit this time. She just leaned back in her chair, eyes sharp, fingers tapping lightly against the desk. "Do you know why you're here?" I swallowed hard. You do." My lips parted, but no words came. She tilted her head. "You thought I wouldn't find out?" Silence. "You thought he wouldn't slip up?" My chest tightened. "He gets careless when he wants something badly enough," she continued, voice almost bored, like she had seen this before. "And you, well, you must have thought you were special." I flinched. She exhaled, shaking her head like she was disappointed. "Do you know what I hate more than betrayal?" I didn't answer. She smiled coldly. "People who think they can outplay me." The room felt smaller. Suffocating. Then she leaned forward, folding her hands neatly on the desk. "I could end this right now," she said simply. "Your job. Your reputation. His reputation." My throat was dry. "Please." Her brows lifted slightly, amused. Please, what? I had no answer. Because I knew what she was saying was true. She had the power. She had the proof. And if she wanted to, she could destroy us both. She let me sit in that realization for a moment before delivering the final blow. You have two choices. I stiffened. 1. You leave this office, hand in your resignation, and never speak to my husband again. I swallowed hard. And if I don't? Her smile didn't waver. Then I make sure you regret it. The weight of her words crushed me. Because I knew. This wasn't a threat. This was a guarantee. And now, I had to decide. Was he worth it? I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. Her words echoed in my mind, sharp and final. Leave, or lose everything. There was no third option. No way to undo what had already been done. Only a choice. And I hated that she was the one who got to decide. I walked out of her office on shaking legs. The walls of the office suddenly felt too bright, too open, like everyone could see right through me. I needed air. I barely made it to the elevator before I felt him behind me. What did she say? Daniel's voice was low, tense, but I couldn't turn around. I swallowed, pressing the button, watching the doors reflect my pale face back at me. You should already know. A pause. Then, his hand on my arm, gentle, pleading. Tell me you're not actually considering it. I finally turned, looking at him, the man who had made me feel wanted, reckless, alive. And for the first time since it started, I saw him differently. Not as the man I couldn't resist. Not as the thrill I had chased. But as someone who had done this before. Someone who had never been afraid of getting caught. And that's when I realized. I was replaceable. If not me, it would have been someone else. Would be someone else. Because men like him don't stop. And women like her? They don't lose. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. Daniel's jaw clenched. You're really walking away? I met his gaze, my chest tight. I don't have a choice. The door slid shut. And just like that, it was over. Epilogue. I packed up my desk the next day. No one asked questions. No one whispered. Because she had handled it. Like she always did. By the time I walked out of that office for the last time, Daniel hadn't texted me again. And I knew he wouldn't. Because I wasn't his first. And I wouldn't be his last. The only difference? I got out before she destroyed me. But somehow, as I stepped into the cold air, heart still heavy, I couldn't shake the feeling. That in some way, she still had won. Because I had cheated. And now, I was the only one paying for it.